All right, so today I'm going to talk about Bermuda's overprint overview, and I will let you know that this is my first official Bermuda presentation, or I guess uh, sort of research on this one. And the idea of this one is just to provide what I call an overview of the overprints. I think for our organization, we have people that have a tremendous expert level knowledge base for Bermuda, and then there are people that have a very beginner, and then there are those that are the intermediate. And for me, I feel like beginner intermediate sort of where I am, but I thought the overprint was a very interesting one. I think the the love of or the draw to Bermuda is not only that we have stamps that are actually used, they're meaningful, right? But they're also limited, that we don't have like a country that does like 80,000 stamps. So it's a relatively tight number of stamps that are produced and then used. The same thing happens with overprints. I mentioned Guatemala using a lot of overprints, but when you start looking at specifics with stamps, whether it's perfs, whether it's pre-cancels or color variations, it sort of adds another level of your collecting experience. And for me, it's something as a beginner collector that overprints can be overlooked sometimes. So you forget what they're doing, or the importance of them, or what was going on during that time. So my overall goal was to sort of identify the overprints that Bermuda has. And I will let you know, I was still working on it 5 minutes up to this presentation. Oh my gosh, talk about a rabbit hole. So I'm excited about that. So I'm going to share some of that. For many of you, this is going to be like sort of beginner stuff, but this is maybe just for me, sort of opening a door for things to look for when we're collecting Bermuda. So some terms right here. We always start with what things mean, and that was an important one for me. Hold on, I'm trying to move my pictures of you guys here. So, and I will let you know for this presentation, I have a lot of writing on slides. I don't usually do that, but because I'm going to be recording this as a YouTube, it's nice that you can just freeze on the screen and then read stuff at your leisure. So that's the idea right here. So I do have text here, and I apologize for that. I usually don't have a lot of text. So an overprint basically is when you take an original stamp and you change it, and usually by printing or putting something on top of it. An overprint, you print something on top of it. So you take an original and then you alter it some way that changes sort of what it's doing. There are specific types of overprint. So overprint is sort of a general term, and the biggest one we look at is what's called a provisional. And a provisional has a very specific need, what it's trying to do. Something happened, the country reacts, the postal system has to make a change or has to produce something. They do it very quickly for a very specific amount of time, usually a short amount of time, and that's called a provisional. Big thing here, this is where we get with a Cinderella versus something that's legitimate. What makes it authentic is that it has to be approved by or authorized by the postal authority of the country. So just because you stamped the Blaine family rocks, that's my family, that doesn't make it an overprint. It just means Michael Blaine was messing with some stamps. So for it to be authentic, it has to be authorized by the agency that was producing it. So overprints can also be called surcharges. So this is something that's been printed on top of an original stamp that changes basically the value of the stamp. It can either increase or decrease the value of it, but this is considered an overprint as well. And as I go through these, I will be showing you surcharges, and I will be showing you provisionals and some other things as well. So there are terms. So the common reasons for overprints, one, biggest one, to add or change the value of of a stamp to have more stamps. So you're taking stamps that you have excess of, but you're missing a specific value. So then you can change the value of stamps you have a lot of and make the stamps that you really want. specifically a value type. So added needed values to excess stamps. And when we look at the overprints for Bermuda, notice that the stamps that are overprinted are those stamps that are sitting in drawers that they have a plentitude of. So they're not picking the ones they only have a couple left of. They're picking ones that they have stacks and stacks and stacks of. So that's a big one. So they take excess stamps and they use those to change a value or to produce a different value stamp. The second one, we'll see this with Bermuda as well. Another lovely thing about Bermuda, they cover all these things, is to commemorate special events or people. So we'll see these stamped on. They can be political things, they can be social type things, but basically they commemorate specific events. And well, I'll be showing you some of those today. The last one, and I thought this was interesting, because it made me think about what does this actually mean, but they can be used to change the function of a stamp, the function of a stamp. So originally a stamp was designed, say, for first class postage, and you can change it so that it's used for something else by the overprint that is on. So I think I have an example of that changes the function of a stamp, but they're the three major reasons why we overprint stamps. So I was scared about this one. So when we talk about overprints, it's funny. It's like when we collect stamps. No one ever talks about the 2000s, the 2000s stamps or the stamps from 1998. They always talk about what? Day one, 1870, the early 1800s, at the 1800s. So 1874 would be the first surcharge overprinted stamp. I think this is hilarious because I'm going to show you all the others, but I know that these first two are probably the big dogs that are going to be walking in the yard right here. So I will let you know this is an overview. We could spend weeks just on this one right here, but I'm just going to give you some basic information about it. So in 1874, there was a surcharge which was called, they used what's called a fancy and block overprint. This was due to a shortage of the three, it's pence. I gotta remember it's pence, not dollars. So the 3 pence stamps. So they converted the 1 pence and the 1 shilling stamps because they're the ones that had the most of, and they had that overprint of the 3 pence at a diagonal, which is kind of interesting. This was specifically to address, and I have Jeffrey, this is a shout out for you, to pay the single stamp rate to Canada. So I guess these Canadians and Bermudas just like to go back and forth. So they ran out of that. So that's why one of the major reasons for that. So I do want to give you some of the numbers right here. So the numbers are important because when you're collecting these things, when you see a small number that's produced, you should know that when you see it on eBay for like 50 bucks, there are going to be some issues with it. So for this one, they took the 1 shilling on March 12th, 1874, and they overprinted 4,000 stamps. That sounds like a lot of stamps, but it's not. Now, this was the first printing, so the P and R, if you're looking at specifics, what makes this one, how you identify it, the P and R are different, and you can do more research later if you're curious what that means. The second one came on March 31st and April 15th, and the P and R are the same in this situation. So there were 4,960 stamps produced. So you have about 9,000 stamps that are out that have this sort of fancy diagonal printing right here. Almost looks 3D, and we'll talk about that in a second. On May 19th and August 13th, 1874, they did overprint of a different type of font, and it was called a block font right here. And there were 4,500 of these produced. So you sort of have these two different sort of versions right here. Only 2 types of stamps are used. So the 1 penny was used. I'm sorry, I think I said 1 pence. So the 1 penny and the 1 shilling were used for this. So this is important because when you're looking for overprints that are not real, you want to make sure that the original stamp is a legitimate original stamp that would have been surcharged on or would have had an overprint on. So this is what they look like. And these both have the fancy capitals. So this one comes from I think it was called Garden Weeds. It's a book back in the day. So let's just say that when people first started doing stamps, they immediately first started to forge them and figure out how to make a lot of money on them, right? So we have to be careful when we're looking at these. These are the most valuable type stamps for Bermuda collectors for overprints here. And there are ways of sort of vetting ones that are not real versus ones that are real. I think the biggest right here is looking at the lettering itself, specifically the P. but also the length of the actual surcharge itself. So you can actually measure that and get a good idea. The fakes, or the forgeries right here, they generally are longer or a different length. So you can double check that, and you can do that. Now again, these were the original, the first and second forgeries. I'm sure there were more, but just be very aware of these. And again, if you ever have a question, this is where the Bermuda Collector Society comes in. We certainly have people that can authenticate these type of stamps, but you want to be very careful with that. So if it feels like it's not a legitimate thing, it probably isn't. Big one here, if you ever get a surcharge on a two pence, I guess, that's not going to be real. So they were only done on the 1 penny and the 1 shilling stamp. So that's an easy one right there. You could say that's not real. Now, doesn't mean that would be a fun stamp to have, but do know that it's not going to be legitimate. So these are what the stamps look like with Roman capitals. So these are still at the diagonal right here. And there's specific things we can look for here as far as what makes them legitimate and what makes them fake. So big one right here, again, you're looking for the length. That's a big one right here. Always the length right here. So again, with the 24 millimeters. But also you're looking at where letters are in the spacing of the letter. So there are sort of telltale signs if this is legitimate or if this isn't. Again, a surcharge on a stamp that was not used is definitely going to be a fake stamp. So be careful with that. I'd be like, oh, this is a one and done. It's probably fake. So just be aware of that right there. I'm not going to go over this, but generally you can read the directions so you can identify, okay, it's this length, that the letters themselves look like this, and these are the checks that we use. Yeah, and again, remember, we're still in the first what? The first surcharges right here, and they already are being faked. So the next one comes up, and believe it or not, the next year in 1875, still in the Queen Victorias. They're going to do them on the 1 and the 2s. They're going to put a 2 value, a 3 value, I'm sorry, one penny value on 3 different type of stamps right here. So again, there was a shortage of 1 penny stamps. They used the printer for this one actually from the Weekly Royal Gazette, which was interesting. They were in charge of the overprintings. They used the 1 shilling, the 2 pence, and the 3 pence stamps. Again, because they had a lot of them. So they are the ones that they used. I do share the numbers to the right here. I'll show you them again. Again, why I show numbers, I don't always have the numbers, but for this one, they're kind of important because things that have a low number of overprints probably are going to be harder to find. Ones that have a higher number of overprints, you have a better chance of finding those. So for the 1 shillings, you're looking at about, what, 20,000. I'm sorry, 20,000 plus another about 24,000. Whereas if you look at the 2 pence, you're looking at a little under 5,000. So when you're looking for scarcity and rarity, those numbers are going to be very important for you. They'll be very important for you. Here are your total numbers. So again, I actually have a green one, and you could probably see why, because they were the most printed. But your blues and your yellows probably a little more scarce right there. But again, I only give you the numbers because they are sort of warnings that these are going to be a little more difficult to find. They should be more difficult to find, and probably be ones that are more apt to be faked or forged. So just buyer beware right there. I will let you know for these that there are some very interesting things that we can use to figure out whether they're real or not. So here are the 3 at the bottom right here. Do know that they did print some without the stop, the period, as we call them in the States here. So you can have those without that end stop, but generally they do have a period on them. So the interesting thing here is the placement of the 1 and the penny, sort of how they line up. And the biggest one is going to be the first N in 1. And if you look at that, you'll see the first downstroke on the end kind of hits the middle of the first N in penny. You can actually, I think they say with the O, it should be a little bit over to the side, but that N should come down sort of in the middle. I'm sorry, at the end of the first one. So down through the middle. So I'll show you an example. So one of these is fake and one of these is real. So if I look at it, and it'll say right here, it's exactly under the center of the O. If you, a line drawn down along the first stroke of the N should cut centrally through the first N of the penny. So if you look at this, the O is what? Directly over the E. But if I take this little N, the first downstroke of the N, and I pull my cursor down, it comes directly in the middle of the first N and penny. Got me on that? But look at this one. So the O is a little over to the right, which maybe would be okay, but follow the N right here. Same thing. If I pull the cursor down, it actually is more lined up with the end of the first N. And then this one would be suspect for not being real. So there are kind of the things that we can do. So there are checklists that we can use to verify whether we are in fact, we have an authentic overprint of the one penny. Cool. So I did want to mention these count. They're not used for actual like mailing postage, but the use of the overprint specimen is considered actually an overprint. So if we get that, you know, they are used. So when the post office orders stamps, they're designing the stamps. The printers will design them, and they will overprint the word specimen on top. This sort of gives the committee an idea that these are not official yet. These are sort of samples or test subjects right here, but they use the word specimen. And sometimes they write it, they write it out, but generally you see a stamp that says specimen, and they can be in any shape or form, but almost every stamp that's designed has a specimen form that has to be approved before it goes to printing. Now the one on the right is an interesting one. I kind of came across this. This is canceled. So you have the same kind of deal. They put canceled across it. I think the same idea. You're sort of still in the pre-printing process where they're approving sort of the ones that they're going to use. So the cancel right here prevents it from being circulated in the as postal currency right there. So you can
Michael,
see
are
specimen.
you taking any comments along the way?
I'm scared to take comments because I'm sure I'm making errors right here. But if you have a quick comment, absolutely.
Well, I was just going to say the specimens. My information is that these ones that are overprint specimens were destined for the Universal Postal Union to be sent out to their member countries, so that the member countries would know what a legitimate stamp from, in this case, Bermuda, would look like,
Right. So
as
it
opposed
has.
to proofs or whatever, which are demonstrating the capacity of the printer to actually produce what they're supposed to produce.
Gotcha. Love that. So specimens then are used, so not really for approval then, but not that, so they can recognize what is being used. Right. Gotcha. Thank you. There'll be more errors, I promise you. All right. I did want to bring this one up. So when we see that, and Jeffrey, I appreciate that. So the Gibraltar overprints technically are not the Bermuda stamps, but they're Gibraltar. They were actually Gibraltar's first stamps. They were issued in 1886. And I will let you know that I'm assuming these are super valuable because you had the big names that were forging them. So again, I don't know if you would have this in your Bermuda collection or not. It certainly started with an original Bermuda stamp, but I just thought this was interesting. So if you ever see these come up, I'm assuming that they should have a high value or they're probably not real. So Gibraltar's overprints. So this brings up to the next legitimate Bermuda stamp. This is the one Farthing Provisional 1901. This one sort of came to be with an inland postage charge to newspapers that was started in January 1st, 1901. And of course, you make a charge, you have to have a stamp that basically meets the demand of that. They didn't have a lot of time to sort of have this happen, so they used the excess stamps that they had, the 1 shillings. Basically, then they overprinted it with the 1 farthing value. I did have to check this one out again, being from the States, sort of what this is. So it is a farthing is a quarter of a penny, and it's actually considered the smallest value, I guess, with what British and Commonwealth currency right here. So I thought that was interesting. So it's a quarter of a penny, quarter of a penny. So the interesting thing with this provisional, and it's interesting, I'm going to call this a provisional, but it's really not a provisional. So we said that provisionals basically are done in a very quick way. They're designed to solve a problem before the solution comes. So they usually don't have a long time span. This one really, because it was it was used for a long time, it was first overprinted in January in 1901, and then the last one was like used until 1908. So we're talking multiple years right here, and it was replaced by the one for I think doc type. But so the argument is going to be, well, it's not really provisional. It was used for many years, but technically, when it was first done, I think the idea was this was a quick solution um, for for covering that expense right there. Um, this one has different sort of versions of it. Biggest one is the coloring of the stamp. So you have sort of like a blue and then like a gray blue right here. Um, there are you can probably look for errors in this one, though I don't really see where there are many error types with this one. Generally, these are the ones that you get. I will tell you something very interesting about this one, and I thought this was hilarious. So when this stamp first came out, stamp, I guess, collectors were preparing for it. They thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be a high value, big collector item right here. So they, on the day that they were released, they did 240,000 stamps. They were sold out within one day. They were sold out within 24 hours. They bought every stamp. They weren't even able to be used for paying for newspapers. So of course, what did they have to do in March? In March and September, they had to print another almost 500,000 and another 500,000. So I guess wishful thinking there. Maybe they overstepped right there, and so that I think the value of them is decreased. Why? Because you have so many of them now. Originally, probably they thought if we buy these all out, they'll be rare, hard to find, and they'll be super expensive. And of course, Bermuda blew that one out by producing another million right there. So, but I thought that was interesting. So within 24 hours, that first group were gone. And I don't know if anybody learned a lesson from that or not, but I thought that was interesting. So this is one where in 1918, 1920, we're looking at sort of revenue for World War, and that this was a sort of had two versions of this one. The 1918 one, you used the same stamp, but you do different lettering right here. So the first printing, they used what's called a Divin capitals right here. And then they used the same one for the second printing. The only difference between the first printing and the second printing was the actual stamp right here, I believe was different shade of red. So you don't look at the actual overprint to tell the difference, but you look at the shade of the actual original stamp. So it goes from red to rose red. The third one, a little bit easier to tell because they changed the font. And this one is, I call it Ionic capitals, but that's a big one here. Now, I did read a little, and Jeffrey, I apologize. I'm not picking on Canada right here, but I thought Canada had an interesting argument. There was an argument written when Canada did the war stamp during the same time, and they said that this didn't really raise money for the war effort. It just was something that was for Canada, for Canadian war tax stamps, that it just helped them, gave them more revenue to basically run the post office. So they said they didn't take out a specific amount of the tax and give it to the military. They just used it for operations. In World War II, that changed where they were actually pulling the money out and using that. So I thought that
Well,
was
if you've
interesting.
ever examined government accounts and tried to trace where the money comes in and where it goes out, and every step that it passes through along the way, good luck.
So I just thought that was interesting. I'm not saying Bermuda didn't, but it was an interesting move with Canada because they're sort of similar kind of why they're doing that. But these are the
Well,
war
there
tax.
were a number of Commonwealth countries that did this
Oh,
because
absolutely.
as the war dragged on and got more and more expensive, every effort was made to raise additional funds to cover the cost of the war. And some bright light came up with the idea, well, why don't we, slap a tax on
Yeah.
postage? So, as you say, they did it. Bermuda just has the two, well, has it on the 1 penny. In Canada, you've got it on a 5, a 20, and a 50.
Okay.
So we got a little bit more aggressive.
Love that. Canada, always working to achieve. So this brings us to the 1940. It's called the Christmas provisional. So this is an interesting one here. Again, running out of a specific value, specifically the half penny. The big one here, why they call it the Christmas provisional, is because the letters were mailed Christmas letters, which is a big time for the postal system, and that was the cost right there. So they needed to make sure that they had the stamps when people came in bulks to mail the Christmas letters right here. So this was the idea. This is an interesting stamp. So they used the one of the pictorials, and they overprinted the word half penny. Basically, it didn't change. It looked like this, and they put X's on the original values on the bottom right and bottom left. Total printing here, you're looking at a pretty good amount. So you about a little under 400,000, so 348,000 here. Though things say there are no errors, meaning that like, you don't really see like inverted and things like that. You do see printing um, uh, faults, maybe we'd say right here. So things that you would see, like here's an example of a bunch of them where you would see the actual overprint would be lower or higher. So you see those kind of things. If you there's a great resource on the Bermuda Collector Society website that focuses on just the Christmas provisionals. So when the overprints are done, as they start to wear, you start having where the lettering themselves start having issues. So you can see abnormalities actually in the lettering itself. So even though they say there are no errors in it, you do get them with the printing from printing so many. All right, let me get this.
One thing of note with this particular stamp is that the stamps themselves are relatively easy to obtain because, again, collectors jumped all over them. But try and find covers with that stamp on it, single usage,
Agree.
because, of course, these would have gone on what we call today Christmas cards. And what happens to the envelopes that Christmas cards come in? I
Yep,
mean, they
they
hit
get
the trash
tossed.
pretty fast.
I will tell you though, if you have friends overseas, like I have some Canadian friends and Great Britain friends, they save their stamps for me, and guess what they're mostly for? Christmas. So it's interesting. So I agree with you on that. All right, next one. So now we're going to move on to, we're not changing the value of a stamp, but this is what we're talking about. We're celebrating an occasion. So this is the Three Powers talk, which was in Bermuda, December 1953. So this was interesting because it kind of brought together the Winston Churchill. It brought together our president Eisenhower and actually the French premier Lanel. And I think the idea of Bermuda, because it was sort of in a neutral area, but I thought that was pretty cool. So you had these big powers coming. What sort of precipitated this was the I guess the Soviet Union during the Cold War and sort of the relationship of the big powers and sort of what they were going to do with that. So interesting meeting right here. Um, and again, using Bermuda as sort of the meeting place right here. I did the picture of this is called, I gosh, I know I'm going to lose it. The Bermuda something club, but this is where they met. So very cool right here. Um, from here, this is sort of what the actual overprints look like. So they use the kind of like a blue purple overprint and a red overprint right here. So these are the two versions you have. And this is the cover that you would get from that. These again are pretty easy to find. Do you know that, interestingly enough, that with Sandy, you could make sure you check for the Sandys if it's the correct one. But I don't think these are really forged that much. So here's the next one. This one's close to my heart. My parents are both blue water sailors. So if you're a sailor at all, this is a cool one. So there is what's called the Bermuda race, the New Bermuda race. And it's one of the oldest races of all times, which is very cool. It's widely known as the Bermuda race. And in 1956, it was celebrating its 50th anniversary. And this still occurs. It was first run, it was first raced in 1906. I'm not going to brag about the winners or anything like that, but it's a pretty cool race. It did lose a little bit of its momentum, but it was revived by both the Royal Bermuda Yacht Club and the Cruising Club of America. So if you look at our next slide here, and by the way, it is the oldest regularly scheduled ocean race. So of course we have the America's Cup, but this is regularly raced, so it's an annual type event right here. Let me show you this one. So this is what it looks like. So the overprints are pretty straightforward. They were done on both of these stamps. You've got a black overprint and a red overprint. Basically gives the 50th anniversary, US to Bermuda, says ocean race, and then gives you the year right there. This is what it looks like, the map of it. So it starts up here and then ends in Bermuda. This is where Delaware is. So if you're ever curious where Delaware is, we are technically a peninsula, but we have a canal. So that canal actually makes us an island. So I like to think of us as sort of like a sibling of Bermuda right there, but that's just my little take on that one. So the Newport Bermuda race overprint. Cool one. So this is a cool one as well too. So this is what's called, I would say, a value change, but it's really not a value change. So this is something that occurred when there was a conversion of the type of money being used. So it's called the decimal conversion. This is something a lot of my British friends are familiar with and Canadian friends are familiar with. Americans, not really so much so. But in 1970, I thought this was interesting that the argument was to convert the older system, I guess that's using shillings and things like that, to a different system that uses things like pennies and dollar and cents. So the British, the United Kingdom had talked about decimalizing the pound, I guess, to make it easier. I'm not going to give you a history lesson on that, but I thought this was interesting that Bermuda jumped on it. So in 1970, it was changed from sterling to the Bermudian dollar. Um, so in February 6, 1970, Bermuda overprinted these. These are beautiful stamps. When these were first printed, these are the architecture stamps. 1962. These were considered one of the most beautiful stamps ever produced in the world at the time. They are gorgeous. So they decided to use these. And basically what they did was they put a line through the original value, and then they changed it to the decimal currency. So what you would have is 6 cents on the 6-penny stamp. So that's sort of what you see right there. February of 1970, they did it to all 17 stamps. I thought it was interesting because on June 17th, 1970, the post office issued the first British decimal currency, which was the 3 large formatted, the Mashins, which are gorgeous stamps as well. The only reason I mention this, because I feel like Bermuda was there first. I did read though that part of this, doing this quickly, was because there were so many tourists from America that they thought this would be kind of like help the poor Americans out, maybe. I don't know. So shout out to America right there. So gorgeous stamps right here.
They made it even easier by tying the Bermuda dollar to the US dollar too.
And we appreciate that. All right. So 1971 flowers. This has an interesting one. So I had an interesting conversation with Horst. He was part of the printing of stamps for a tremendous amount of time in Bermuda, and he is just a storehouse of knowledge. And he was part of this, so he shared some interesting things here. So one thing you should notice, and well, actually, no, I'll take that back. I'm going to talk about this later. So this one was the Heath Nixon. I know I want you, this is why I'm going to mention this. I want you to notice that Heath is before Nixon. So we have the American president, but we also have Heath actually coming before them because he's considered the host for this event. This was a big one in December of 1971 because these were the two big leaders that wanted to talk about the Atlantic Alliance. And basically what you're looking at here is sort of what the goal of the European goal of the political union, and specifically how it would be affected with the rest of the world. So I thought this was interesting. This one not only was in Bermuda, but they ended it with a dinner on the HMS Glamorgan. And there's an interesting story, I think, about sort of how they had that dinner that night. So an interesting one there. So Heath Nixon, December 1971. So this one, this is a newer one. So December 4th, 1986. This is a cool one because it doesn't really, for me as a collector, I remember finding this one thinking, oh, this is interesting. What's this about? And you should see something kind of unique about this one. But generally what you have is a Bermuda stamp that has the $3 kind of blacked out and then a 90 cent added to it, but nothing else. And with a little sort of background research here, I found out that this was part of the World Wildlife Federation's, it was the fund's 25th anniversary. And interesting enough, Bermuda has always been forefront of wildlife preservation. They were one of the first to talk about saving turtles and protecting turtles. Ironically, years before the World Wildlife Federation even was a thing. So the World Wildlife had asked Bermuda if they would honor this 25th anniversary by having a special stamp. The idea here with these special stamps is they wanted them to sort of be of a high value, usually over a dollar. And at the time, Bermuda really wasn't kind of feeling that, but they were in this. They wanted to support it, so they had a plethora of these $3 stamps. So they grabbed them and they basically overprinted 90 cents on them. I think, and that covered both bases. And they could kind of nod their head and say, "Look, there's a shout out to you, but we're still able to recycle these stamps." Now, why this stamp right here is special is because if you look at it, this one has a double print on it. So you see the 90 cent right here, and you see the actual blackout. But if you look above it, you see an inverted 90 cent and a blackout over here. And what happened was this was double printed. So the actual sheet flipped and then it was printed again. And you have this double imprint, which is kind of cool. But the majority of them look like you'll have the blackout here and then the 90 cents. Here's another example of a double print. So the things that you see, and this is an example of the actual cover. At the time that the World Wildlife Federation asked them to do this commemorative stamp, Bermuda was already coming up with their own commemorative coin. So they sort of tied together anyway. I think Bermuda was more involved with the coin itself. So again, they picked the turtle. They had a lot of them, and they used that basically for the overprint. So very cool one. And this whole series, by the way, is gorgeous of the actual the wildlife of Bermuda. Just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful stamps. So if you get a double or one that looks like this, put that in a safe spot. It's a good one. So as a new collector, you're kind of going through stamps, and this happened to me, and I'm looking at these stamps and I'm thinking, hold it, this one is celebrates, the original it's the centenary kind of deal, and she's original Bermuda stamps. But this one has a little writing on it. What is this? And this is one as a new collector I had to do a double take on. And actually it's an overprint. So this is the 1990 stamp world that was occurred in London. They used a previous set of stamps that basically celebrated the Commonwealth Postal, I guess what the conference. But the overprint right here, you can see it. It looks like a dove. It says Stamp World London 90. So very cool right here. This is the first day cover. And why Bermuda even bothered with this was because it was the 150th anniversary of the world's first stamp, the penny black, which was issued in 1840. And also 1990 was the 150th anniversary of the uniform penny postage. So this all fit into Bermuda's sort of event right here. And they didn't really want to produce a different stamp for this one, but they did want to celebrate it. So they picked these because they were already sort of celebrating the first stamps, and the overprint was added to that. The actual original exhibition was in 1873. So it was pretty cool right there. And this, by the way, I'm not going to read this to you, but this was on the back of the actual presentation. This comes from Bermuda. So this gives you information of what they were trying to do and what their celebration was. So the Stamp World London 90 Bermuda overprint. So another cool one. So this one, we look at Bermuda, sort of these iconic architecture, beautiful stamps. And then you have the wildlife and fauna stamp series. This is the shipwreck series. And you think, well, shipwreck, that's not really all that cool, Mr. Mike. So, but it is. So they're beautiful stamps. And basically they not celebrate, but they identify some of the major shipwrecks that occurred in Bermuda. I'm on the Delaware Peninsula, so we have tremendous shipwrecks as well too. but Bermuda identified the key ones and basically celebrated them with stamps. So that part of it has its own thing, but what makes this one interesting is that I don't want to say reissued them, but they did something to them. So here's the original set right here. Goes from 3 cents all the way to $8. There's your first day cover, 1986. But look what they did. So in 1989, they did imprints. So they use the same stamp. So technically, I'm adding this because technically it was overprinted on it. Now it's called an imprint because it's also going to be called an underprint, because what they did was they added 1989 at the bottom of it. So you have the original stamp, but then you have a new date. So I'm kind of putting this in there because these are things that if you're a collector that you might not notice. And it's small. It's at the and I try to give you a bigger version of it, but down here, so they did with the dollar, the $2 and the $3, and at the right below the image, you actually have the date 1989. Interesting enough, they did it again in 1990. So these were the 1990 imprints, and they did these on the 3 cent and the 20 cents. And again, they look just like the original, but at the very bottom, and this is where I have to take my phone and kind of magnify it so I can see it. I'm already wearing reader glasses, but right here and right here in very small print, you would see 1990. So again, not really a big value right here, but certainly, something interesting here. So they use the original shipwreck series, and they're doing imprints on it. So they weren't really done with that. They weren't done. They actually said, hey, let's do some surcharges on them as well. Again, and there's some other things. If you listen to Horace, if you read that 700-page thing he'll add another really cool thing about this series. And I encourage you to check that out. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but there's something really cool about this series. But I'm not going to spoil it. I'll make you find that one out. But in 1990, they did surcharges as well. So the 12 cent, they changed to 30 cent. You can see the cross out in the $1.50 to 80 cent. The 12 cent, they went to, I'm sorry, the 50 cent, they changed to 55. So things, again, that you can look for that were done to original series. So this stamp series, I mean, you got multiple things that you can look for, which is really cool. We're getting there, right? So we started with the 1800s, right? Now we're in the 1980s. This is when I graduated from high school. So 1986, back with the ships again. They're not done. So 1992, they're like, hey, let's go ahead and put a 1992 imprint on these stamps. And again, we've got 7 values here. So they're not changed, but they basically, they did the imprint. I put the word underprint. So they use both of those because it's an underprint underneath the actual original stamp. So it's below it. So here in little teeny letters, you have 1992. So exact same stamp, but they add the date, a new year date. And again, the original stamps didn't have a date on it, so that they're adding the date. So the 86 doesn't have 86 at the bottom. There's nothing on it. So they add the new dates at the bottom. All right. Now we're in the 90s. We're getting there. So this is the one I want to share with you. So originally you saw that Heath Nixon. You notice that Heath was first. Again, not just because of the big English thing, but because they were the host. Well, so this is an interesting one because I immediately saw this and thought, oh, that's interesting. They did Bush first. That's the American president. Wow, that's American. We're like, oh, that's pretty cool. So, but I was curious why that was done. So I talked to Horst on this one, and he was part of this one. And I thought this was an interesting sort of like a backstory with why this happened. Because generally, as a British, host, you would have Major come first. And I had asked him, well, why wasn't Major first? And what he said was, ready for this one? It's not because Bush was that much cooler or Major that, whatever. It was because if you did Major Bush, it sounded like President Bush was a major. Now, in America, we have a couple other things we might add to that, but I'm not going to bring it down. We're going to keep it in layman's right here. But the Bush major. So if you did Major Bush, British thought that would be confusing, so they reversed it, and so it's Bush major. So I thought that was really cool right there. Horace did say some interesting things when we talk about actually like these overprints. The first one you were talking about doing it by hand, and then we had sort of newspaper printers, and later I could show you sort of what they look like, but they had like a printer that would just put whatever the overprint was going to be. For this one, he made an interesting comment that the printer that they were using, they ran some tests through it and it worked great. But then when they ran the stamp through it, it didn't. It immediately stopped the press. And he figured out that the press has an emergency that when it senses nothing under it, when it senses there's no sheet, it stops the printing. So the idea is the sheet goes through, the sensors go, oh, no paper, and it stops printing, right? So they couldn't figure out why it was stopping. And what Horst said was that the perforations lined perfectly up with the sensor. So the sensor thought, oh, there's no sheet here, and wouldn't let them do the overprints. So the fix was shifted over to the side, and then the stamps went over fine. So that's again, what does that have to do with anything? But it's just a cool story, and it adds some interesting to the stamps. But Bushmaker, 1991. I'm assuming that that meeting went well. All right, 1995. So these are the flowering fruits. Same kind of deal. So we're using underprints here. So the original series, beautiful fauna of Bermuda here. So it highlights the actual plant and the actual fruit that it does, or the flower that it does. So no year that's printed on the original, 1995. But then when they do the underprint or the inside, you do actually have a date. So you would see that same kind of deal that we saw with the shipwrecks. You would have a little 1996, 1998. And for this one, yeah, I don't have the set on this one. They're little teeny, right? The same kind of little year right here. So I want to make a note that the 1996 and 1998 overprints were done on the 18 cent. So this stamp right here. So this stamp actually has 3 versions. The original 1995, the 96, and then the 98. They also did it on the 75 cent and the 90 cent, but they only did it in 1998. So if you're collecting that, you're going to see some variation right there. But this 18-cent one was done three different ways. So the 1995 flowering fruits overprint for 96 and 98. So this is another one where I'm collecting, right? So I told you I'm sort of new in Bermuda philately, and I had these stamps and I was, putting them in the album. And I noticed, like, I'm big for visuals. Like, one stamp doesn't look like the other. And this is sort of what I looked at. I had a group of stamps that looked just like this. And what I noticed that was, well, some of them had these little orange things and some didn't. And well, guess what? That orange thing is actually an overprint. So the original Lighthouse series, 1996, beautiful series as well too. Bermuda, fantastic with their designs. But in 1997, Hong Kong basically had an event, and Bermuda wanted to celebrate it, and this is what they did. So the 11th Asian International Stamp Exhibition took place in Hong Kong. Why this was important? Because it was the first time an international stamp exhibition was held in Hong Kong. And I think that was a big deal. So Bermuda wanted to celebrate that. They had these lighthouse series, which were gorgeous. And I'll bring it back up again. So this design right here, what you see says Bermuda, but you have the Hong Kong and then the writing in 97. So that is what you see in actually the overprint right here. So the regular stamp, the regular issue stamp, really nothing. It's the regular stamp, does not have the overprint. So you're looking for orange here. And the orange for the 80 and the 250, and I think the 30-cent, they're on the right, but the 65, it's on the left. And I think that's because the Lighthouse predominantly it encompasses that right-hand side and would block out the image of the lighthouse. So they put it on the left-hand side. So this is the 1997 overprint of the Lighthouse series. Of course, good. And again, beautiful stamps. Oh my gosh. So, and I will let you know that as I was trying to go through these, obviously I'm still learning as I go through here. It's amazing. The more you miss some, and then you go back and you read it and you find some more right here. So I think I got every overprint right here. I think I did. If I don't, I'm sure hopefully someone will correct me here. But I believe this is the last one, and this is a cool one. And Jerry, I'm gonna give you a shout out on this one because this is the one you told me to look out for. This is the 2021 Essential Workers overprint. Again, this was another series, beautiful series that Bermuda did of the shells of Bermuda. They picked this specific shell, which is a neat one. I think the shape of the shell kind of was inducive to where you could print on top of it and would give you a nice design. So July 15th, 2021, we're talking about the pandemic here. Bermuda wanted to honor its essential workers, so they thought a stamp would be appropriate. So 21 here, they had the overprint honoring all essential workers, all caps here. And it was on the 50-cent stamp. But with that said, they did have a special commemorative envelope that sold for $2 that had this special logo that says, "Thank you to everyone who is working so hard to help us through the COVID-19 pandemic." So pretty good shout out right there for Bermuda. And that's a cool one. And I don't know about as far as like errors and things like that, but I definitely, I'm sure there probably will be. But this is the newer one. So these are kind of, I guess, for 2001, like brand spanking new right there. So I will let you know that I use various resources right here, but the majority of are our own resources. David, Horace, Richard, phenomenal information. Their displays, I would absolutely recommend not only the 700-page reference that Horace has, but if you go to the Bermuda Collector Society under the displays, fantastic. And looking for overprints and more information, that's where you want to go. My purpose was just to give you an overview of the overprints, just to give you something to think about, but also for future collectors that gives them an additional thing to get excited about when collecting Bermuda stamps. So with that said,